My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 35 years old, and for years, Christmas meant sitting quietly while my sister Marissa was showered with praise, and I was treated like the extra place setting at the table. That winter in Seattle, I thought I could swallow it again, just get through another holiday. But when my parents lifted their glasses and called her their only daughter, something inside me snapped. I stood up, every sound in the room stopped, and within minutes, the night turned into something no one expected. What would you have done if it were you sitting in my chair? Stay with me, because this story will take you to the moment where silence ended and truth finally broke free. Let me take you back to where it began. Seattle in December never failed to put on a show. Outside the windows, the rain slid down in silver streaks, catching the glow of the holiday lights my father had strung along the porch. Inside the house, the warmth pressed against my skin, a mixture of the oven heat, the crackling fire, and the hum of too many voices competing at once. Every inch of the dining room seemed filled. Platters of mashed potatoes, bowls of cranberry sauce, trays of gingerbread cookies, still dusted with sugar, all lined the table. I sat at the side, my knees nearly touching the folding chair in front of me. Someone had covered our makeshift table with a paper tablecloth printed with snowmen. Two children scribbled with crayons across from me, their parents barely noticing, as they leaned into conversations further down. I smiled at the kids, trying not to let the sting of it all settle too deep. I was 35 years old, but once again, I was placed where the family thought I belonged, pushed aside. The sound of my father's throat clearing pulled everyone's attention to the head of the main table. Robert Carter, tall and still broad-shouldered, despite his age, stood with his glass raised. His cheeks were flushed from wine and the heat of the fire. Linda, my mother, slipped an arm through his, her hair pinned neatly as if she were hosting a gala. The room quieted in waves, forks clinking down chairs, shifting to face him. He lifted his voice steady and full of conviction. To our only daughter, Marissa, who means the world to us. There it was again. Only daughter. I felt my stomach clench as though the words themselves had teeth. For an instant, I wondered if anyone else noticed, if someone would turn to me with confusion, maybe even whisper, "Did he forget Evelyn?" But no one moved. Instead, a chorus of cheers rose, hands clapping against the polished wood table, glasses lifted high. Marissa soaked it in. My sister sat draped in red velveted dress that shimmered when the chandelier light touched it. Her nails glittered as she curled her fingers around the stem of her champagne flute. She gave a little wave like royalty, her smile stretching so wide I wondered if her cheeks hurt. I caught the flash of her phone beside her plate screen lighting up with notifications. No doubt she would post this toast online before dessert. The applause swelled. Aunts leaned in to tell her how proud they were. Uncles nodded, murmuring about her success. Cousins snapped pictures, no doubt eager to tag her. All of it spun around me like a whirlpool, pulling tighter and tighter. I pressed my hands into my lap. Breathe, I told myself. Just breathe. A cousin at my side chuckled. Guess you're stuck at the kids' table again, huh? He nudged his wine glass toward the coloring books spread in front of the children. I forced a polite laugh, my eyes never leaving the head of the table. Marissa's gaze slid to me then. For a flicker of a second, her smile sharpened the edges, twisting with something that felt less like joy and more like triumph. My chest burned. That look said it all. She knew exactly what had been said, and she liked it. Memories pressed in uninvited. Christmas mornings where she opened a mountain of gifts while mine fit into a small box. Birthday parties where she got the spotlight and I got the leftover cake. Years of being told to understand, to be patient, to let her shine. The ache of those moments stacked one on top of the other until they sat heavy on my shoulders. The fire popped loudly behind me. I could hear my own pulse pounding in my ears faster with each second. The room was still clapping, still laughing, still treating me like I was invisible. Something inside me cracked. I pushed my chair back. The screech of wood against hardwood sliced through the noise. The sound carried bouncing off the high ceilings. Conversations stumbled to silence. Dozens of eyes turned. My father lowered his glass, slightly uncertainty flickering in his expression. My mother's hand tightened on his arm. I stood tall though my palms trembled. Heat climbed my neck, but my voice rose clear, firm enough to cut through the room. You will remember this night. The words filled the space, echoing against the walls. For a long second, no one moved. The carol playing from the stereo faltered into the next track, softer now beneath the weight of my declaration. Marissa's smile wavered, her lips parting, as if to argue, but no words came out. A murmur rippled through the guests, quiet and uneasy. The children across from me looked up, crayons frozen in midair. I lowered my hands to my sides, forcing my shoulders back. My legs shook, but I refused to sit right away. I let them see me, really see me, for the first time that evening. Finally, I slid back into my chair, the sound of it scraping softer this time. My heart still raced, but I kept my gaze forward. The fire snapped again, louder now in the heavy silence. The moment lingered like smoke curling in every corner of the room, refusing to disappear. Everyone waited, but I said nothing more. I simply sat, steadying my breath, knowing deep down that this night had only just begun. I was 8 years old the first time I realized Christmas could hurt more than it could heal. The snow had fallen hard that winter in Seattle, heavy flakes covering the front yard, and I remember pressing my nose to the frosted window as my mother called us into the living room. The tree sparkled with strands of silver tinsel and gifts piled underneath like a mountain waiting to be climbed. My heart beat fast with excitement as my father handed out the presents, each box wrapped in shiny paper and topped with bows. When it was my turn, he gave me a small package that fit easily into my hands. I tore it open carefully, thinking there might be something special inside. It was a puzzle, the kind you find at the discount store, 500 pieces with a picture of a snowy village. I smiled politely and whispered thank you, even as my throat tightened. I wanted to be grateful, but the disappointment sat heavy in my chest. Then came Marissa's turn. She was only 4 years younger than me, her hair tied with red ribbons that matched her dress. My father and mother carried out a long rectangular box too big to fit under the tree and placed it right in front of her. Marissa squealed, ripping off the paper, and there it was. A child's upright piano, glossy black with a red bow draped across the top. The whole room clapped, aunts and uncles snapping photos, cousins crowding around to touch the keys. Linda leaned over, her voice full of pride. Marissa is the light of this family. The words sank like a stone in my stomach. I sat there with my puzzle on my lap, staring at the shiny piano that caught every reflection in the room. No one noticed me slip away into the kitchen. I sat at the table, resting my chin on my arms, pretending to study the candy canes in the centerpiece. That night I went to bed early. From my room, I could hear the faint sound of Marissa pressing keys on her new piano, the notes uneven but celebrated like they were magic. The years that followed carried the same pattern. Another Christmas came, and I was given a set of colored pencils, while Marissa unwrapped a brand new camera with extra lenses. She paraded around the living room taking blurry photos of the family dog, while everyone laughed and told her she had a gift. I remember clutching my pencils tightly, whispering to myself that one day they would see me too. By the time I was 12, my parents had turned Christmas into a stage show for Marissa. That year they rented a hall at the local church and invited neighbors, saying it was to celebrate the season, but really it was to show off Marissa's photography. She had taken pictures of the snow-covered streets with that camera they had given her, and they displayed them on poster boards for everyone to see. People walked around nodding, telling my parents how talented she was. I stood in the back holding a small science fair ribbon I had won earlier that month, hoping someone might ask about it. No one did. After the party, I slipped out onto the church steps where the cold air bit into my cheeks. My grandfather Albert found me there. He was bundled in his old wool coat, his hat pulled low, and he carried a thermos of hot chocolate that steamed in the night. He sat down beside me and handed me the cup. "You have something real, Evelyn," he said softly, his voice carrying that quiet strength I trusted. "Don't let them make you feel small. You are not invisible." I nodded, swallowing hard. "But they never see me, Grandpa." He patted my shoulder gently. "They are blinded by her shine. But true light, the kind that lasts, comes from what you build with your own hands." His words warmed me more than the hot chocolate. For the first time, I believed that maybe I was more than the shadows they placed me in. Still, the holidays became harder. At 14, I remember watching Marissa unwrap a pair of designer boots, the kind every girl at school wanted. The room exploded in cheers as she tried them on, stomping proudly across the carpet. My gift that year was a paperback novel, the cover already bent, as if it had been sitting on a shelf too long. I thanked my parents anyway, but when I looked up I caught Marissa staring at me, her smile sly like she knew she had won again. It was that night, lying awake in my bed while snow fell outside, that I whispered a promise into the dark. One day I will leave this house and I will step out of her shadow. That vow carried me through the years. Every time another Christmas came with more applause for Marissa and silence for me, I repeated the words to myself. At 16, when she got her first car as a Christmas surprise, and I got a second-hand coat, I said it again. At 17, when she had a party thrown in her honor, and I was told to keep quiet during dinner, I clenched my fists and repeated the promise. I studied harder, stayed longer at the library, pushed myself to earn grades that would take me far. It was the only way I knew to fight against the silence that pressed around me. The memory of those Christmases sat heavy in my heart that night, in 2024, as I returned to my chair after speaking up. Every clap of applause from Marissa at that table had sounded just like those cheers from decades ago. My parents still saw her as the light and me as the shadow. But I had built my own light, one they had chosen not to see. And deep down, I knew that the promise I made as a child was about to be kept in a way none of them could ignore. The fire in the living room burned lower, casting long shadows across the walls, and the sound of forks scraping plates started again. Conversation picked up in cautious tones, but the air had changed. I sat still, hands folded, carrying the weight of every Christmas past inside me, waiting for the moment when all of it would finally break open. When I finally left home for college, it felt like stepping into air that was cleaner and lighter than anything I had known. The University of Washington campus was buzzing with energy and possibility, and I threw myself into my studies with the same determination I had carried through every long night at the library in high school. Law had always fascinated me, the way words could hold power, the way arguments could shape justice. I promised myself I would make something of it, something no one could ignore. The years passed in a blur of textbooks, late-night debates with classmates, and endless cups of coffee. In 2013, I walked across the stage in my cap and gown, clutching the degree I had worked so hard for. My grandfather Albert was there, his eyes shining with pride as he stood in the crowd. My parents came too, but even as they hugged me, I could sense the distance, like their minds were already somewhere else. By the time I joined a law firm in downtown Seattle, my path felt clear. I specialized in environmental law cases that focused on companies polluting the Duwamish River, the lifeline that ran through the city. It was grueling work, combing through records, facing powerful corporations with teams of their own attorneys, but every victory mattered. Each time a settlement was reached or a fine was enforced, I felt a spark of justice. While I was building my career, Marissa was building something entirely different. She had dropped out of community college after a year, saying school was boring and not worth the effort. Instead, she bought a cheap camera with money from my parents and began posting photos online. At first, it was simple outfits, thrift store finds posed against brick walls or coffee shops. Then came brand sponsorships, photo shoots in Los Angeles, and soon her followers climbed into the hundreds of thousands. By the time I was sitting in meetings about toxic waste permits, she was crossing 1 million followers and smiling from glossy advertisements. Our parents could not stop talking about her. Linda forwarded me every article that mentioned Marissa, telling me how exciting it was that people recognized her talent. Robert would shake his head with pride, saying she had a gift for connecting with people. When I tried to explain the details of a case I was working on, they nodded politely before changing the subject back to her latest campaign. The contrast between us became a kind of running joke in the family. At holiday gatherings, my uncles asked Marissa about her collaborations with fashion brands, their voices full of interest while they asked me if being a lawyer was stressful, already turning away before I could answer. Cousins teased me lightly, saying I was the serious one while Marissa was the star. Still, I kept working. There was one case that consumed nearly 2 years of my life, a lawsuit against a manufacturing company that had been dumping chemicals into the Duwamish. I spent nights combing through evidence, meeting with community groups, standing in courtrooms with a stack of documents heavier than my arms could carry. When the verdict came in our favor, and the company was forced to pay millions in damages, I felt the kind of triumph that should have silenced every doubt. The celebration at the office was loud and joyful. My boss, Diane Foster, clapped me on the back and told me I had done outstanding work. I went home that night, buzzing with pride, eager for the first time in years to share my success with my family. I called my parents and told them everything, how the case had been won, how it would change the community for years to come. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then my mother said warmly, "That's wonderful, Evelyn. Did you see Marissa's new post, though? It hit 1 million likes in just one day." I stood in my kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear, staring at the clock on the wall. The pride that had been swelling in me deflated like air escaping a balloon. My father's voice joined in, chuckling. "She really knows how to make people pay attention. We are so proud of both of you, of course." The conversation drifted quickly back to Marissa's success, how she had been invited to a holiday party in New York, how she was being courted by bigger brands. I murmured my congratulations, though the words tasted bitter. After I hung up, I sank into a chair and pressed my forehead into my hands. It was not that I begrudged my sister her success. She had worked in her own way to carve out her path, but the imbalance was crushing. No matter what I achieved, no matter how many hours I put in, or how many lives my work touched, my parents saw her as the one who deserved applause. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and looked out the window at the city lights of Seattle. The sound of traffic on the freeway drifted faintly through the glass. I thought of the vow I had made as a child, whispering into the dark that I would step out of her shadow. I had done it in the world outside these walls. Judges, colleagues, and communities saw me. But inside my family's home, I was still invisible. I turned the glass in my hand, watching the wine cling to the edges. I told myself I would not let their blindness define me. Yet somewhere deep inside, the ache returned heavier than before. It was becoming clear that the battle I had thought I had won was far from over. The spring air in Seattle carried a damp chill, the kind that clung to your coat even after you stepped inside. I arrived at the office one Monday morning in 2021 with a nervous kind of energy. For months, I had been pulling 12-hour days leading a complicated case against a construction company that had been leaking waste into the Duwamish River. My team was exhausted, but the work was strong, and Diane, my boss, had been hinting for weeks that a promotion was coming. Senior associate. The title had a weight to it, a recognition that all the sacrifices were worth something. I thought about the hours I had missed. With friends, the late-night dinners of takeout noodles, the mornings I woke up on the couch with case files scattered around me. It was supposed to lead here. The partners gathered in the conference room that morning. Coffee steamed in paper cups, and a plate of muffins sat untouched in the middle of the table. Diane stood at the head, her voice carrying that calm authority everyone respected. She spoke about leadership, resilience, and the kind of reliability a senior associate must embody. I sat tall, heart pounding, ready to hear my name. When she announced another colleague, a man 3 years younger than me, with half the experience, I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Polite applause filled the room. My palms pressed against my skirt as I forced myself to clap along, my smile brittle. My colleague blushed with pride as Diane handed him a folder, and I swallowed hard against the lump forming in my throat. After the meeting, Diane asked me to step into her office. She shut the door gently and gestured for me to sit. Her expression was careful, as though she had rehearsed. "Evelyn, it was very close. You've done excellent work, but there were concerns about your reliability." The word hit like a slap. Reliability. I blinked at her, stunned. I had never missed a deadline, never failed a client, never left a case unfinished. I leaned forward, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can you explain what that means?" Diane sighed, folding her hands. "These things come from above me," whispers impressions. "It isn't always fair, but it matters in decisions like these. Keep working hard. This isn't the end." I nodded, but inside my chest a storm was brewing. Whispers. Impressions. Someone had been saying things, and they had been believed. For weeks after, I threw myself into work with even more intensity, trying to prove those whispers wrong. Late at night, when the office was empty, I stared at my reflection in the window, the city lights behind me, wondering whose voice had poisoned the air against me. Then came John Miller. We had been collaborating on a grant proposal worth $50,000 to support cleanup projects along the river. John was enthusiastic, calling me late in the evenings to discuss details, praising my drafts and my persistence. We were nearly finished when, out of nowhere, he pulled the plug. His email was short. "Evelyn, I can't move forward with you on this project. I've heard things about your work ethic and I can't risk it." I called him, immediately pacing my apartment with the phone pressed to my ear. "John, what things? Who told you that?" He hesitated, his voice strained. "I don't want to stir up conflict. Let's just say I've been advised. I need to protect my reputation too." My chest tightened. So that was it. Someone was feeding lies into the right ears, slowly corroding my credibility. That night I sat at my kitchen table, files spread in front of me untouched. My glass of water sat warm and forgotten. I stared at the city skyline. Through the window, my heart heavy with the realization that this was not coincidence. 2 blows in a row, both tied to my supposed reliability. Someone wanted me to fail. The suspicion gnawed at me. I tried to push it aside, but every interaction with Marissa floated back. The smug smile when my parents praised her. The way she asked about my clients in that casual tone, as if she were fishing. I told myself I was imagining things, that no sister would go so far. But deep down, unease coiled tighter. The confirmation came one Saturday. I had promised to bring groceries to my parents' house. The air smelled of pot roast the moment I stepped inside, and voices drifted from the living room. I moved down the hallway, quietly balancing the bags in my arms. Then I heard Marissa. Her voice was low, almost conspiratorial. "Don't worry, she'll never outshine me. She'll never be the one they talk about." The bags trembled in my hands. I pressed against the wall, my breath caught in my throat. There was a pause, then the sound of her soft laugh, sharp and certain. My body went cold. I backed away, setting the groceries quietly on the kitchen counter, and slipped out the back door without saying a word. The cool air outside slapped against my skin as I hurried to my car. I gripped the steering wheel, staring out at the quiet street, her words replaying again and again. She'll never outshine me. That night I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk, staring at case files, unable to read a single word. My stomach churned with anger and disbelief. Marissa had always been competitive, always hungry for attention, but this was different. This was sabotage whispered in the right places, time to cut me down, just when I was ready to rise. The ache I had carried since childhood deepened into something darker. I thought of the piano, the cameras, the Christmases, where she was called the light of the family. It had never been enough for her to shine. She needed me to disappear. I closed my eyes and pressed my palms against the desk, steadying my breath. The puzzle pieces were sliding into place, forming a picture I did not want to see. My sister was not just thriving on her own path. She was actively pulling me down. The city outside buzzed with life cars, rushing past, the hum of late-night traffic filling the silence. I sat alone in my apartment, the shadows stretching across the walls, knowing that this battle between us was only beginning. Brian came into my life like a breath of fresh air after years of grinding through long nights at the firm. He was a freelance journalist who wrote for local Seattle magazines, the kind of man who noticed details others missed. We met at a community forum about the Duwamish River of all places, where he had been covering the story, and I was presenting evidence for one of my cases. His questions were sharp, but his smile was warm, and soon after, he asked me to get coffee. By 2022, we had been together for nearly 2 years. We spent weekends cooking simple meals in my small kitchen, his laptop always open with half-written articles, my files stacked in the corner. He had a way of softening the edges of my days, of reminding me that life was more than deadlines and verdicts. That spring, things began to change. His texts grew shorter, his calls less frequent. I told myself it was the pressure of his work, that freelance journalism was unstable and demanding. But one evening he showed up at my apartment, his jaw tight, his eyes clouded with something I could not place. "We need to talk," he said, his voice clipped. I set aside the case, brief in my hands, my stomach tightening. "What's wrong?" He pulled out his phone and thrust the screen toward me. There it was, a message that looked like it had come from my number. It read like a confession, suggesting I had spent the night with someone else, dropping just enough details to sound convincing. I felt the color drain from my face. "Brian, I never wrote that. That's not me." His eyes searched mine, wounded. "Then how do you explain this?" "It came from your number." I reached for his hand, but he pulled back. "I don't know. Maybe someone spoofed it. Maybe it's some kind of scam. Please, you have to believe me." He shook his head slowly, his mouth twisting in pain. "I've defended you to everyone, Evelyn. I've trusted you with everything. And now this." The room seemed to spin. I kept insisting it wasn't me, that I would never betray him, but the more I spoke, the more he closed himself off. His shoulders stiffened, his eyes hardened. Finally he said quietly, "I can't do this anymore." He left with the sound of the door clicking shut, leaving me standing in the living room with my hands trembling. I sank onto the couch, staring at the message still glowing on his phone in my memory. It felt like a cruel joke, except there was nothing funny about it. Days passed in a blur. I tried to reach him, leaving messages he never returned. At night I lay awake, replaying every moment of our relationship, searching for cracks, wondering if I had missed a sign. The pain was sharp and relentless, like carrying a stone in my chest. When my parents heard, Linda offered little sympathy. "Maybe he wasn't the right man for you anyway," she said, busy adjusting the garland on the mantel. Robert mumbled something about things working out in time. Neither of them asked about my side of the story. Marissa, on the other hand, appeared at my door 2 days later with coffee in hand. She leaned against the counter, her eyes wide with practiced concern. "Oh, Evelyn, I'm so sorry. You deserve better. Some men just can't handle strong women." I nodded, exhausted, too broken to argue. She reached out, patting my arm with just a little too much pressure, and when our eyes met, I caught it. That flicker. The glint of satisfaction hidden beneath the mask of sympathy. It was gone in a flash, replaced by her soft smile, but it lodged in my mind. I thought of the whispers at work, the way John Miller had backed out, the timing of it all. Could she have gone further than I ever imagined? That night I sat by my window, Seattle lights blinking across the bay, the question echoing louder than the traffic below. My sister had always wanted the spotlight, always thrived when I was pushed aside. And now, as I stared at the broken pieces of my relationship, I felt the suspicion harden inside me. I could not prove it, not yet, but deep down I knew. The message that shattered my life bore her fingerprints, even if no one else could see them. I turned off the lamp and sat in the darkness, my breath shallow, my heart heavy. The silence of the apartment wrapped around me, and for the first time I understood that the damage she was capable of went far beyond childhood rivalries. The following weekend I drove south on I-5, rain streaking across my windshield as I headed for Portland. I needed to breathe different air, and more than that, I needed someone I could trust completely. Julie Park had been that person since law school. She had a sharp mind, sharper instincts, and a loyalty that never wavered. If anyone could help me make sense of the chaos in my life, it was her. We met at a corner cafe not far from her apartment. The place smelled of espresso and baked bread, warm enough to chase away the chill of the gray afternoon. Julie spotted me through the crowd and waved, her long black hair tucked into a scarf, her laptop already open on the table. She hugged me tightly before we sat down, her eyes searching mine. "You look like you haven't slept in days," she said softly. I let out a humorless laugh. "That's because I haven't." Once the waitress set down our coffees, I poured everything out. I told her about the promotion that slipped away, the whispers about my reliability, John Miller's sudden withdrawal, the breakup with Brian, and most of all Marissa's voice that day, in my parents' living room. As I spoke, the words tumbled faster, as though releasing them could lighten the weight pressing on my chest. Julie listened without interrupting, her fingers steepled under her chin, her eyes narrowing with each detail. When I finally stopped, my throat raw, she leaned closer. "Evelyn, this isn't coincidence. This is a pattern. I rubbed my temples. I thought so too, but it sounds paranoid. Who would believe me if I said my sister is sabotaging my life? Julie didn't hesitate. I would. Her certainty steadied me. She pulled her laptop closer and began typing quickly. People who smear reputations often leave trails. Let's look for anything that's been said about you online. For the next hour, we combed through social media news forums, even obscure blogs. That was when Julie found it. A small Instagram account called Seattle Truth Watch. It had fewer than 200 followers, but nearly every post targeted me. One accused me of inflating my credentials, another claimed I had mishandled a case and cost the city money, another called me sloppy and unreliable. The words cut deep, even though I knew they weren't true. My stomach churned. No wonder clients had hesitated. No wonder whispers had spread. I looked up at Julie, my voice barely above a whisper. Who would care enough to make this? Julie scrolled further, her brow furrowing. The account only followed a handful of people. Oddly enough, one of them was Marissa. My chest tightened. That could be nothing, I said quickly, though my pulse raced. She follows thousands of people. Julie shook her head. Not like this. Look. She pointed to the creation date. The account was opened the same week your Instagram was hacked. That's not a coincidence. I leaned back, my hands trembling around my coffee cup. Anger and fear collided inside me. The idea that Marissa might have orchestrated all of this made me feel sick, but the pieces kept fitting too neatly. Julie clicked a few more times, tracing metadata, something I barely understood. Then she froze. I've got something. She turned the screen toward me. The account was linked to a burner email one created just days before the first smear post. The name was generic, but Julie's voice was sharp. Whoever set this up was sloppy. They reused an IP address that matches a location in Capitol Hill, just blocks from Marissa's apartment. I pressed my hand against my mouth, my stomach twisting. I wanted to deny it, to say it was impossible, but the evidence sat glowing on the screen. Julie closed the laptop gently and fixed her eyes on me. If Marissa is behind this, we can prove it. We can do it legally, step by step, so there's no question. I stared at her, the cafe noise fading around us. My voice cracked when I finally spoke. She's my sister. Julie reached across the table, squeezing my hand. And she's tearing your life apart. I looked down at our hands, hers steady and firm, mine shaking. The truth I had been avoiding was right there, undeniable. Marissa wasn't just competing with me anymore. She was destroying me from the shadows. Julie's voice softened, but her eyes stayed fierce. We'll follow the trail. If she's behind it, we'll find proof. And when we do, she won't be able to hide behind smiles and followers. I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat almost painful. For the first time in months, I felt something close to hope, fragile but real. Julie leaned back, determination etched on her face. If Marissa is behind this, Evelyn, we're going to expose her. The conviction in her voice wrapped around me like armor. I nodded slowly, knowing this was the first step in a fight I had never wanted but could no longer avoid. 2 weeks later, my phone rang just after dinner. I glanced at the screen and saw my grandfather's name. Albert rarely called at night, so I answered quickly, my fork still on the plate. His voice was steady, but there was a weight in it that made me sit up straighter. Evelyn, can you come by the house tomorrow? There's something I need to tell you, and I don't want to do it over the phone. The next afternoon, I drove across town to his small rambler tucked on a quiet street in Ballard. The yard was neat with rows of trimmed hedges. He still tended himself despite his age. I knocked lightly, and he opened the door, his cardigan buttoned up, his glasses slipping down his nose. He smiled, but his eyes were serious. Come in, kiddo. Let's sit in the den. The den smelled of old books and pipe tobacco. He poured 2 cups of tea and set them on the coffee table before lowering himself into his armchair. I settled on the couch, my hands folded in my lap. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Evelyn, I've been thinking a lot about what's been happening with you. I know it hasn't been easy, and I want you to know I've seen more than you think. I swallowed the warmth in his words, already loosening the tightness in my chest. He reached for a folder from the side table and placed it in front of me. Inside were a few papers neatly folded. I drafted my will years ago, he said quietly. I left some things to your mother and father, but I wanted you to know that I set aside a portion just for you. $250,000. The number made me blink. My throat tightened as I whispered Grandpa why. He gave a small smile, though his eyes glistened. Because you've been overlooked, Evelyn. I saw it when you were a child, and I still see it now. It's not about money. It's about making sure you have something that's yours, something no one can take away. Tears stung the back of my eyes. I reached across and took his hand. Thank you. He squeezed my fingers. Don't thank me. Just promise me you'll use it to build the life you deserve. For a moment, I felt a strange peace, like someone had finally chosen me after years of being invisible. But his next words pulled me back into the storm. I shouldn't even know this, but last week I walked into the kitchen while your mother and Marissa were talking. They didn't see me. He paused, his jaw tightening. They were discussing ways to keep the will quiet, to make sure it never sees the light of day. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? He sighed. I only caught pieces, but your mother said something about not letting you cause trouble, and Marissa laughed, saying you'd never find out anyway. I sat frozen, the teacup cooling between my palms. The picture formed too easily in my mind. They had been erasing me in every way they could, and now even my grandfather's final wishes were in their sights. Grandpa leaned back, his face tired. I haven't changed a word of it. The will is filed properly, and my lawyer knows my intentions. But I wanted you to be aware, so you're not blindsided. I nodded slowly, my pulse racing. It wasn't just my reputation, my career, or my relationships anymore. This battle stretched deeper into blood and inheritance, into the way my family valued me or erased me entirely. I left his house as the evening sun dipped low over the Sound. The streets glowed orange, but all I felt was the tightening coil in my chest. I drove in silence, gripping the wheel until my knuckles whitened, hearing Marissa's laugh echo in my ears. Back in my apartment, I spread the papers across the table, staring at the neat lines of my grandfather's handwriting. The number itself didn't matter as much as what it meant. Proof that someone believed in me. Proof that I was worth something more than scraps. But now, it was also a target. I could almost picture Marissa whispering in my mother's ear, planning how to bury the truth, how to make me disappear even from a will. I closed my eyes, pressing my hands flat against the table. This was no longer about being invisible at Christmas dinners or being compared to her online fame. It was about survival, about refusing to let her erase me from every corner of my life. When I opened my eyes, the city outside was dark, lights flickering across the skyline. For the first time in years, I felt a quiet rage settle inside me, not wild, but sharp, like a blade being honed. The fight ahead was no longer just about clearing my name. It was about claiming what was mine before she stole that too. Julie wasted no time once I told her about my grandfather's warning. She invited me back down to Portland for the weekend, insisting that if Marissa was bold enough to tamper with my reputation, she had probably left more evidence than she realized. I drove down on a Friday evening, the highway slick with rain, my mind restless with equal parts dread and determination. Her apartment smelled faintly of lavender and coffee, the kind of mix that made me feel grounded. She had her laptop open before I even sat down, screens pulled up with spreadsheets and browser tabs. Julie was relentless once she had a lead, and I could see the fire in her eyes. She started with bank records. Years earlier, my parents had set up a small joint savings account meant for family emergencies, one that technically included both Marissa and me. I had nearly forgotten about it until Julie suggested looking through the statements. She had ways of requesting records legally, and within a day she slid a file across the table to me. "Take a look at this," she said. I scanned the numbers, my heart thudding harder with each line. Multiple withdrawals, all in the last 12 months, totaling $6,000. Each withdrawal linked back to Marissa's debit card. Julie leaned closer. And here's where it went. She clicked another tab and showed me receipts from an online marketing company. They specialized in boosting social media metrics, buying fake followers, and inflating engagement numbers. I let out a shaky breath. So her empire was built on lies. Julie nodded. And she used family money to do it. That's not just unethical, Evelyn. That's theft. I sat back, my hands trembling against the edge of the table. The puzzle was taking shape. Next, Julie moved to emails. She traced the burner account that had managed the smear campaign, the same one linked to the Seattle Truth Watch page. After hours of cross-checking, she pulled up a message sent to John Miller's company server. "Here's the one," she said firmly. The email warned Miller that I was unreliable, that I cut corners, and that working with me could cost him his credibility. My chest tightened as I read the words. It explained perfectly why he had pulled away without a clear reason. Julie pointed to the header data. The IP address matched the same location as the Instagram account. Capitol Hill, right near Marissa's loft. I closed my eyes, pressing my palms into my face. It was like being punched in the gut. Every lost opportunity, every whisper at the firm, every sideways look from colleagues, it all tied back to her. Julie reached across and touched my arm. "That's not all. Listen to this." She pulled up an audio file she had managed to capture through a source at a networking event Marissa had attended. A friend of Julie's worked in digital security and had been asked to test sound equipment at the venue. By chance, Marissa's voice had been recorded when she thought no one was listening. The clip was grainy but clear enough. Marissa's voice dripped with arrogance. "She'll never surpass me. She's too weak. I'll make sure of it." My stomach flipped as I replayed it twice, the words cutting deep. She wasn't just competitive. She was deliberate. Julie's eyes hardened. This is what we needed. A pattern of behavior, a trail of money, documented lies, and her own words. As if the night couldn't get heavier, my phone buzzed on the table. Brian's name lit up the screen. My breath caught. I hadn't heard from him in months. Julie gave me a nod to answer. I stepped onto the balcony, the Portland rain misting in the air. "Hello," I said cautiously. His voice was hesitant, but softer than I remembered. "Evelyn, I owe you an apology." My chest tightened. "What do you mean?" He explained that he had been cleaning out old files and ran across the message that had ended us. A friend of his who worked in tech had checked the metadata. It hadn't come from my number at all. It had been spoofed through a third-party service. The same service he discovered that Marissa had used in the past for influencer campaigns. I felt the blood drain from my face. She set me up. Brian's voice broke. "I should have trusted you. I'm so sorry." I swallowed hard, tears burning at the edges of my eyes. "Thank you for telling me." When I hung up and returned inside, Julie was waiting. She read the expression on my face before I even spoke. "That was Brian, wasn't it?" I nodded. He confirmed it. "The text that ruined us was fabricated, and Marissa's fingerprints are all over it." Julie exhaled slowly, leaning back in her chair. "Then it settled. We have money trails, burner emails, smear campaigns, stolen funds, and now corroboration from Brian." She tapped the folder she had been compiling. "This isn't just suspicion anymore, Evelyn. It's evidence." I sank into the couch, my body trembling with a strange mix of exhaustion and relief. For so long I had felt like I was fighting shadows, unable to prove what I knew in my bones. Now the shadows were taking form, clear and undeniable. Julie closed her laptop with finality, her eyes locking onto mine. "If Marissa is behind all of this, and everything points that way, we're going to hold her accountable." The rain tapped harder against the windows, the sound steady and relentless. I folded my arms tightly, feeling the weight of the file on the table, the proof of years of betrayal. For the first time, I believed that justice might finally be within reach. The following week, my parents asked me to come over for dinner. It was the Saturday before Christmas, and the house was already strung with garlands and twinkling lights. The smell of pine and roasted chicken filled the air as I stepped inside. Marissa's voice carried from the living room where she laughed with an aunt over her latest brand campaign. I gripped the strap of my purse, the folder of evidence tucked tightly under my arm. Linda greeted me with a brisk kiss on the cheek, her eyes already darting past me toward the kitchen. Robert gave me a quiet nod, his hands in his pockets. I sat at the table with them once Marissa drifted off to take a phone call, her heels clicking across the hardwood. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to meet their eyes. "There's something you need to know," I began, sliding the folder onto the table. My mother frowned. "What's this?" I opened it, laying out the pages. Bank statements showing the missing $6,000, the email header from the burner account, the transcript of Marissa's own words caught on audio. My voice shook but held steady. She's been using family money to buy followers. She sabotaged my promotion, poisoned my reputation with John Miller, and even fabricated the message that ended my relationship with Brian. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. My father leaned forward, scanning the papers with furrowed brows. My mother didn't look down at all. She sat straighter, her lips pressed thin. Finally, she spoke, her tone sharp. "Evelyn, this has to stop. You've always been jealous of your sister." The word sliced through me. Jealous. That old accusation they had used since childhood. Every time I pointed out the imbalance, every time I asked for fairness. I shook my head, my voice rising. This isn't jealousy. This is evidence. She's been stealing, lying, and destroying everything I've built. Look at the bank records. Look at the emails. Linda waved a hand as if brushing away crumbs. People make mistakes. She's under pressure. Do you know how hard she works to keep up her image? I stared at her, stunned. My father shifted in his chair, his eyes flicking between us. He picked up one of the statements and studied it, his jaw tightening, but he said nothing. "Dad, you know this isn't right," I pressed. "Say something." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. His gaze dropped back to the page, and I caught a flicker of unease in his eyes. But the silence stretched. I felt the heat rise in my chest. All my life I had waited for them to see me, to defend me, to tell me I wasn't invisible. Instead, my mother looked at me with disdain, and my father sat caught between truths he didn't want to face. Linda leaned closer, her voice lowering. "This family doesn't need another scene. Let it go, Evelyn. Don't ruin Christmas." I pushed back my chair, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. My hands trembled as I gathered the papers back into the folder. I looked at both of them, my throat tight with rage and heartbreak. "You think this is about Christmas?" I asked quietly. "This is about years of letting her take everything while you watched." Neither of them spoke. The silence was answer enough. I slipped the folder back into my bag and stood tall, though my chest ached. "Fine. If you won't face the truth, then I will." Robert finally lifted his eyes, something almost like guilt flashing across his face. But still, he said nothing. I walked toward the door, my footsteps echoing in the decorated house. The trees sparkled in the corner ornaments, catching the glow of the lights, but to me it felt hollow, like the shine was only there to cover rot. As I stepped outside into the cold December night, the decision hardened inside me. I could not count on them to protect me. I could not count on them to even acknowledge the truth. The fight was mine alone, and if I wanted to be heard, I would have to make sure the world listened. The chill bit into my cheeks as I pulled my coat tighter. Across the street, children were stringing lights around a snowman, their laughter floating in the air. I walked to my car with my head high, the folder pressed against my side. Christmas dinner would be different this year. I would not sit quietly at the kids' table while Marissa basked in applause. I would not swallow my anger while my parents looked away. I slid into the driver's seat, the engine rumbling to life. My hands steadied on the wheel, my reflection staring back from the dark windshield. This time the truth would not be hidden. This time it would be undeniable. The night of Christmas Eve arrived colder than usual, the kind of chill that sank into your bones and made every breath visible in the air. My parents' house glowed from down the street, strings of white lights draped across the roof, candles flickering in the windows, the lawn decorated with a plastic nativity scene that had been there since I was a child. Cars lined the curb, voices and laughter spilling from the front door as I parked and stepped out into the icy air. Inside, the house was packed. Relatives I hadn't seen in years mingled with neighbors and members of my parents' church. The dining room table stretched longer than I remembered, two smaller tables pushed together and covered with crisp white cloths. Platters of food crowded the surface, golden turkey at the center, bowls of mashed potatoes and cranberry sauce filling the edges. The smell of nutmeg, cloves, and roasted meat hung heavy. I took my seat near the end, my phone resting quietly in my lap, its screen dark but ready. I had spent days preparing the posts, checking and rechecking the evidence Julie and I had gathered. Every screenshot, every audio clip, every financial record was lined up like pieces of a puzzle. All it needed was a single tap to be released into the world. The hum of conversation quieted when my father stood. Robert held his wineglass high, his cheeks already flushed from the warmth of the fire and the company. My mother, Linda, slipped an arm through his, her face beaming as if the moment was hers too. The room leaned toward him, every fork set down, every eye fixed at the head of the table. To our only daughter, Marissa, who means the world to us. The words sliced through me like a blade I had heard too many times. Applause erupted instantly, glasses clinking, cheers rising in waves. Marissa rose gracefully from her chair, her velvet dress catching the chandelier light, her smile wide and radiant. She bowed her head modestly as cousins snapped pictures as uncles raised glasses toward her. I pushed my chair back. The scrape echoed across the hardwood floor, sharp enough to silence the clapping. Dozens of faces turned, brows furrowed, unsure. My legs shook, but my voice came steady. Enough. Marissa's head snapped toward me, her smile freezing. "Evelyn, sit down," Linda hissed, her tone dripping with warning. But I didn't sit. I lifted my phone, my thumb pressing send. Within seconds, the posts went live. Every guest tagged, every file attached. Screens across the room lit up almost at once. A chorus of buzzes and chimes filled the air, the sound oddly synchronized, like bells tolling in judgment. Whispers spread down the table, growing louder, as eyes scanned screens, as gasps broke from lips. An aunt near the center whispered, "This says she stole $6,000. Someone else muttered, "Look at this, it's an email, it's from a burner account." Across from me, a cousin replayed the audio clip, Marissa's voice spilling into the festive air. "She'll never surpass me. She's too weak. I'll make sure of it." The words hung in the room, heavier than smoke. Marissa's face drained of color. She fumbled for her phone, her hands trembling as she scrolled, her breathing shallow. Her voice cracked when she finally spoke. "This is all fake. She's jealous. She's always been jealous." I held her gaze, my own voice calm. "Then explain the bank records. Explain the burner email that went to John Miller. Explain why Brian just confirmed the message that ended us came from the same service you used." Her lips parted, but no words came. She looked to my mother for support. Linda rose quickly, her face pale but her tone firm. "This is not the time, Evelyn. You should be ashamed for ambushing your sister like this." The whispers surged louder. A church friend, sitting near the window, shook his head. "Ashamed? These documents look real. If they are, Marissa's been lying to all of us." My father sank back into his chair, his glass forgotten on the table. His eyes darted between me, Marissa, and the screens in front of him. He opened his mouth, but no words came, only silence that betrayed his unease. Marissa slammed her palms against the table, rattling the silverware. "She's lying. She made this all up. You all know how bitter she is." But no one rushed to defend her. Guests exchanged looks, lips pressed tight, brows drawn low. My grandfather Albert leaned forward, his weathered hands resting on the table. His voice was calm but clear. "I've known Evelyn all her life. She tells the truth." The room hushed. Marissa's eyes darted wildly, her breath quickening. She tried again, her voice shrill. "You can't believe this. It's Christmas. She's ruining Christmas." I lifted my chin. "I didn't ruin anything, Marissa. You did." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the carols playing faintly from the stereo seemed distant, hollow. Every eye in the room locked onto her. The glow of the Christmas lights overhead reflected off their faces, not warm now, but cold, like the lights of a jury. Marissa's hands shook as she tried to gather her phone, her voice sputtering. "This isn't fair. You don't understand." But the words fell flat. The evidence spoke louder than anything she could say. The dining room, once filled with laughter and cheer, had transformed into a courtroom without walls. The jury was everyone who had ever cheered for her, everyone who now saw the cracks in her perfect image. She slumped back into her chair, her face pale as porcelain. The applause that had once belonged to her had vanished, replaced with whispers sharp as knives. The glow she had cultivated for years, dimmed in an instant, smothered under the weight of truth. I remained standing, my phone still in hand, my chest heaving but steady. For the first time in my life inside that house, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't the forgotten daughter at the kids' table. I was the one holding the truth, undeniable and unshakable. The Christmas feast sat untouched, the turkey, cooling, the mashed potatoes growing a film across their surface. No one lifted a fork. The night had shifted irreversibly, and there was no going back. Phones continued buzzing across the table, the glow of screens throwing cold light against faces that had once been so eager to smile. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, whispering in tight clusters, while Marissa clutched her wine glass like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Then a loud ringtone shattered the low murmur. Everyone turned to her. She fumbled with her phone, her hands shaking as she answered. "Yes, this is Marissa." Her voice carried that same practiced brightness she always used in business calls. But within seconds it faltered. "No, wait, please. You can't just cancel. We had a signed agreement." Her free hand tightened around the back of her chair. $50,000. You don't understand. This is all lies." The room held its breath. She turned away, pacing a few steps, her voice climbing higher. "No, please just give me a chance to explain." But the call ended abruptly, and she stared down at her phone like it had betrayed her. Linda was on her feet in an instant, gripping Marissa's arm. "What happened?" Marissa's face crumpled as she choked out the words. "They canceled. One of my biggest sponsors. $50,000 gone." A ripple of shock passed through the table. An uncle leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. A cousin whispered to another I knew. That follower count was too good to be true. One of the church elders muttered under his breath about dishonesty, always catching up. Two aunts stood gathering their coats. "We should probably get going," one of them said, her eyes avoiding Linda's glare. Soon, others followed, chairs scraping the floor, murmured excuses filling the silence. The dining room thinned as people filed out, the once festive crowd unraveling like a frayed ribbon. Linda turned on me, her voice rising with a sharpness that made the chandelier tremble. "Do you see what you've done? You ruined Christmas. You ruined your sister's life." I stood slowly, my own hands flat on the table. "No, Mother. Marissa ruined it when she stole from our family, when she spread lies to destroy me, when she thought her spotlight mattered more than the truth. And you ruined it by defending her every step of the way." Gasps broke from those who remained. Robert sat frozen, his eyes locked on the papers still scattered on the table. His hands, usually steady, trembled as he set his glass down. He looked at me, then at Marissa, then back again. His voice was low, but carried through the room. "Evelyn." I braced myself for another dismissal, another wound disguised as a lesson. But his words caught me off guard. "I am sorry. I should have protected you. I should have listened." The admission hung in the air, heavier than any toast he had ever raised. Linda stared at him in disbelief, her mouth opening to protest, but the words never came. Marissa's face twisted, her voice breaking. "Dad, how can you take her side?" Robert lowered his eyes, shame etched into every line of his face. He said nothing more, but his silence was louder than her protests. Marissa collapsed back into her chair, burying her face in her hands. Linda hovered at her side, glaring at me with a fury that could have burned through stone, but even she looked shaken. Around the table, the last of the guests whispered uneasily, the clink of silverware long forgotten. That night, back in my apartment, I sat by the window as the city glowed faintly under a cloudy sky. My phone buzzed relentlessly on the counter, notifications pouring in as the posts spread beyond the dinner table into the wider world. Screenshots of Marissa's words circulated online. Hashtags with her name trended for all the wrong reasons. Comment sections filled with anger, disappointment, and ridicule. I refreshed her social media page once, then twice. The numbers told a story sharper than any headline. 1 million followers dropped to 800,000, then 600,000, then tumbling downward like a rock in freefall. By sunrise, she had fewer than 200,000 left, and the number kept shrinking with every refresh. News outlets picked it up quickly. Former sponsors issued crisp statements about integrity and values, cutting ties before the flames touched them. Influencers who had once smiled beside her quietly deleted photos and severed connections. I sipped my coffee slowly, the steam rising against the cold glass of the window. Relief mixed with exhaustion, not triumph. The world had simply seen what I had always known. Around noon, my phone buzzed again, this time with a name I hadn't expected to see: Marissa. The message was short and frantic. "Please, can we talk?" I ignored it, sliding the phone back on the counter. An hour later, a knock rattled my door. When I opened it, she stood there, mascara streaking down her cheeks, her shoulders shaking with sobs. She clutched her phone to her chest as though it could shield her from the storm. "Evelyn, please. You have to help me. They're tearing me apart. Nobody believes me anymore." Her voice cracked, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the girl she had once been, the one who played piano at Christmas, while I unwrapped socks in the corner. But the weight of years pressed heavier. I thought of the lies, the sabotage, the way she smiled while dismantling my life. I kept my hand on the doorframe, blocking her from stepping inside. "You wanted the spotlight, Marissa. Now you're standing in it." She reached out, her fingers trembling. "I'll lose everything. Please." I held her gaze steady now, in a way I had never been before. "Everything you lost was built on lies." Her sobs echoed in the hallway as I closed the door gently but firmly. Inside, the apartment was quiet again. The only sound, the hum of the heater, and the faint buzz of my phone still alive with notifications. The storm had shifted. For once, it was not mine to weather. The weeks after Christmas felt strangely quiet, as if the noise of my family's collapse had finally given way to silence. Headlines and online chatter carried Marissa's name everywhere, but instead of praise or admiration, it was linked with words like fraud, deceit, and scandal. Sponsors pulled away one after another, and within a month her career had unraveled completely. Then came the lawsuit. Julie guided me through every step, steady and sharp as always. The case covered defamation, financial theft, and breach of trust. In court, the evidence spoke louder than her tears. The judge's voice was firm when he ordered Marissa to repay the $6,000 she had stolen from the family account and awarded $15,000 in damages for the harm she had caused me professionally. Watching her stand there, mascara streaked, nodding miserably as the verdict was read, I felt no joy, only closure. Around the same time, my grandfather's will was executed. True to his word, I received $250,000. I remember sitting with him in his cozy den, the papers spread between us. His eyes twinkled with pride as he patted my hand. "You've carried so much, Evelyn. Now carry this for yourself." It wasn't just money. It was recognition, proof that I had been seen even when others had worked so hard to erase me. At the firm, the tide turned as well. Diane called me into her office on a Monday morning in early spring. Her smile was genuine this time, her voice warm with respect. "Evelyn, the board has reviewed everything, and we want you to step into the senior associate role." Congratulations. The words washed over me like sunlight. After years of clawing for acknowledgement, of swallowing dismissals and sabotage, I had finally been trusted with the position I deserved. My colleagues clapped a few, offering pats on the shoulder, and for once there were no whispers, no doubts clouding the air around me. Life began to take on a new shape. Mark Reynolds, a high school teacher I had met at a community event, slowly became a constant in my world. His kindness was simple, unadorned, steady, in a way that steadied me too. By summer, he moved into my apartment downtown, filling it with laughter, stacks of novels, and the smell of homemade bread on Sundays. Julie remained my rock, our Sunday coffee meetings turning into dinners, hikes, and plans for trips we never seemed to finish planning, but always enjoyed dreaming about. And my grandfather Albert was as much a part of my daily life as ever. We included him in everything, bringing him along for picnics, long drives, and quiet evenings on the porch, with pie cooling on the table. The three of them, along with Mark, became my real family. Not bound by expectations or favoritism, but by loyalty, honesty, and love freely given. The home I had been denied all my life was finally something I built for myself. By the time my 35th birthday rolled around in the fall of 2025, I knew exactly how I wanted to celebrate. No banquet halls, no spotlight-stealing toasts. I invited only the people who mattered most. Mark decorated the living room with string lights and photos of our adventures. Julie brought a bottle of wine and laughed when she spilled a little on the counter. Grandpa insisted on baking his famous apple pie, carrying it proudly through my doorway with a grin that made me tear up. We sat around my kitchen table, mismatched plates, stacked with pasta and salad candles flickering gently. There was no performance, no competition, no shadow of comparison, just warmth, just laughter. Just me finally surrounded by people who loved me for who I was, not for how I could be diminished. Later, when the candles on my cake flickered down to embers and the pie had been devoured, I leaned back in my chair, listening to the hum of voices around me. I thought about the long road that had led me here every Christmas, past every wound, every betrayal. And I realized that this was what it meant to win. Not to have the last word, but to have peace. If you were me sitting at that Christmas dinner when the truth came crashing down, what would you have done? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if this story spoke to you, stay with us for more stories of justice, family, and the strength it takes to stand tall.